every monsoon, Gurugram drowns, and every year the officials call it the rain. Here's the number they don't put in the press release. Since 2016, the city has spent 500 crore rupees trying to fix its drainage. This year, a spell of rain that lasted 4 hours put roads across the city underwater again. Not once in 9 years has that spending actually stopped the flooding. That's not bad luck. That's a system working exactly the way its incentives are built to work. Here's the real answer to the question everyone keeps dodging. This is not a freak weather event, and it's not simply the rain. It is a systemic failure, and the rain is the trigger, not the cause. A city tore out the natural systems that used to move water away, split the job of replacing them across five agencies that don't answer to each other, and let enforcement against the people building over what's left crawl through courts for over a decade while new construction kept getting approved anyway. That's the mechanism. Let's walk through it. Start with what used to be here because this is the part almost nobody covering Gurugram's floods actually explains. During the British era, the region had 63 check dams, locally called bunds, built specifically to catch runoff coming down from the Aravali Hills and direct it into a natural basin before it ever reached the city. Alongside them sat seasonal lakes and open drainage channels that did the same job for water flowing across flatter ground. Today, four of those 63 bunds survive. The rest have been encroached on or built over. A satellite study by the Center for Science and Environment found that Gurugram has lost more than 80% of its natural water bodies over the last 3 decades. One of them, the Gata Jheel, once covered roughly 300 acres. It's gone now, and the Development Authority's own report on the city's water bodies can't even fully account for where the water it used to hold was supposed to go instead. This matters because water doesn't disappear when you build over the place it used to go. It just goes somewhere else, usually into whatever's lowest and closest, which in Gurugram means basements, underpasses, and the ground floor of buildings that were never designed to be part of a floodplain. The Badshapur drain, one of the city's key stormwater channels, has been narrowed and partly concretized by construction along its banks. So when a hard rain hits the slopes of the Aravalis, the water has nowhere left to go except straight into the city. That's not a mystery. That's basic hydrology, and it was documented and understood by the people planning this city long before the floods got this bad. So why hasn't it been fixed? This is where the second cause comes in, and it's less about nature and more about who's actually in charge of the fix. Gurugram's infrastructure is split between the Gurugram Metropolitan Development Authority, the Municipal Corporation of Gurugram, the older urban development body known as HSVP, the National Highways Authority for the stretches of national highway running through the city, and private developers who are responsible for infrastructure inside their own colonies. Five different players, five different jurisdictions, and when a road floods, it is genuinely unclear which one of them is supposed to answer for it. That's not an accident of bad planning. That's what happens when responsibility gets this fragmented. Nobody owns the failure, so nobody has to fix it. Here's the part that should make you angrier than the flooding itself. The development authority collects what's called an external development charge from every real estate developer building in the city. That money exists specifically to fund the trunk infrastructure, main roads, main sewer lines, and drainage. Urban sector experts who track the city's spendings say there's real opacity about how much of that money has actually gone into building and upgrading the drainage network it was collected for. Separately, government auditors have flagged a more concrete problem. In multiple instances, contracts to clean out the drains before the monsoon were awarded just before the rain started or after they'd already begun. That's not incompetence at the level of not knowing what to do. Everyone involved knows exactly what needs to happen before monsoon season. The clearing work gets timed so late that it functions as something to point to, not something that actually works. A photo of pumps being installed does more political work than a drain that's actually been desilted 3 months earlier. Now, the third cause, and this is the one with real teeth because it's not about maintenance, it's about who gets to keep building. Since 2013, the National Green Tribunal has had an active case open over illegal construction on protected forest land in the Aravali Hills across Gurugram district. In 2020, the state's own forest department identified enough violations to issue show cause notices to 195 people. That case is still moving through the system years later. Separately, a wetland called the Najafgarh Jehil, which once spanned roughly 220 square kilometers along the Delhi Haryana border and still hosts thousands of birds, has been waiting since 2014 for the state government to simply notify it as a protected wetland, a step that wouldn't even require tearing anything down, just legally recognizing what's already there so nothing more gets built on it. Deadlines for that notification got set, missed, and reset more than once. And in the same period, Haryana's draft regional plan for 2041 quietly removed a rule that had capped construction inside conservation zones like the Aravalis at 0.5% of the land. That cap didn't get tightened in response to the flooding, it got taken out. Sit with that for a second. While the city held emergency meetings about why it keeps flooding, the planning document that governs where new construction is allowed got rewritten to allow more of it in exactly the zones responsible for absorbing the water in the first place. Nobody needs to invent a conspiracy here. You can just read the timeline. So, who actually benefits from all of this staying unresolved? Land in the Aravali buffer zones and along old drainage channels is valuable precisely because it's scenic, elevated, and close to a city that's grown into one of India's biggest business hubs. That value only gets realized if someone can build on it, and building on it only stays profitable if enforcement keeps moving at the pace it has, which is to say, slowly enough that a project can get built, sold, and occupied before any court order catches up to it. The tribunal cases have been open for over a decade. The properties they concern are not still empty. The state government, meanwhile, gets a growth story it can point to, a metropolitan area that turned from farmland into corporate campuses and glass towers inside 25 years. Admitting that the growth engine itself broke the water systems the city depends on threatens that story. So, the more politically comfortable move is to keep calling it the rain. And here's who takes the blame instead. Every year, the same handful of scapegoats show up in the coverage: overcrowded urban villages, illegal paying guest housing carved out of homes that were built for one family and now hold dozens of tenants, street vendors blocking pedestrian paths, garbage clogging small drains. All of that is real. In one enforcement drive, officials sealed hundreds of illegal paying guest rooms and found more than 4,500 property violations in a single set of neighborhoods. But notice what that framing does. It puts the visible, small scale, low income version of overbuilding front and center, while the large scale version, entire drainage channels narrowed by big developments, entire lakes disappeared under formal permitted high value construction, gets discussed in a different register entirely as a slow moving legal and planning matter rather than an urgent civic emergency. Both versions clog the same water, only one of them gets treated like a crisis. Here's the gap between what gets said publicly and what actually happens. Every year before the monsoon, officials announce a master drainage plan, a desilting drive, a crore rupee upgrade. Every year, the city floods anyway, and every year the explanation reverts to the weather. A drainage system built 20 to 30 years ago, according to a study commissioned from IIT Delhi, was designed to handle around 15 to 20 millimeters of rainfall an hour. A single storm this year dropped 100 millimeters in 4 hours. That system was never going to hold, and nobody with access to that study can honestly claim not to have known it. Now, to be fair to the other side of this, because a sharp answer still has to hold up under real scrutiny, some of this genuinely isn't anyone's fault in the way corruption is somebody's fault. Gurugram sits right against the slopes of the Aravali Hills, which means rainwater naturally concentrates and rushes downhill into the lower parts of the city regardless of what anyone builds. Rainfall patterns across northern India really have gotten more intense and more compressed, more water falling in shorter, harder bursts rather than spread evenly across the season, and that trend would strain even a well maintained system. And Gurugram went from a small town to a major business hub in about 2.5 decades, a pace of growth that took most global cities the better part of a century. Some infrastructure lag is what you'd expect from compression that extreme even under honest management. None of that erases the pattern of stalled enforcement, opaque spending, and a construction cap getting removed instead of tightened. It just means the honest answer isn't pure corruption, it's systemic failure operating on top of a genuinely hard geographic and climatic problem, which makes the failure worse, not more excusable. Here's the detail that makes this impossible to file away as just another monsoon story. In the same city where residents describe the daily commute during rains as turning into something close to hell for everyone, where people spend hours stranded at their desks past the end of their shift because the roads outside are underwater. A flat inside one of Gurugram's most prestigious residential towers sold for 85 crore rupees. Same city, same monsoon season. One version of Gurugram exists inside gated, elevated, privately maintained infrastructure. The other version is standing calf deep in a road that used to be a drainage channel a generation ago. The flooding doesn't hit everyone in this city the same way, and that's not a coincidence. It's a direct result of who got to build where and who's had to live with what got left behind. So, where does that leave the actual fix, the one that almost never comes up in these emergency meetings? The map of Gurugram's original bunds, lakes, and drainage channels isn't lost. It exists in old surveys and it's still visible in satellite image, faint outlines of where water used to go before it got built over. Notifying the Najafkar wetland wouldn't cost the state a single rupee in construction. It would just mean saying no to whoever wants to build there next and holding to it. That's the sacrifice nobody's made yet, because it means turning away money and political goodwill from an industry that funds a huge share of the region's growth, and it means telling people who've already bought land or built homes in these zones that some of it may need to come down until someone with the power to enforce that decision is willing to absorb the cost of making it before the next monsoon, not after another meeting about the last one. This will keep happening. The technical part of the fix has been sitting on the table for years. The only open question is whether anyone in a position to act on it is willing to spend the political capital it costs. So far, the pattern gives a pretty clear answer. The real question worth asking isn't whether Gurugram will flood again next year, it's who gets asked to give something up so that it doesn't, and whether that conversation happens before the water rises or only after.